What's up, guys? Welcome back to another video on what if Deku was transported to Danmachi part 7. Now, we got announcements to make, so before that I'm gonna go shout out people who joined the Discord. Thank you for AM and Daddy Dorito for joining the Discord. Now, let's jump into the shoutouts, okay? Now, I understand that I think most people were confused about the plot points on 6.5, causing some very, let's just say, weird comments to make it nicer sounding, okay? Now, I'm gonna explain this real quick for y'all, okay? 6.5 was just meant to represent the MHA side of things. Now, don't get me wrong, Uraraka is not gonna be a part of this. Literally, that was like her claim to fame, her 5 moments of standing in the sunlight. There's literally nothing else about it. So let me real quickly explain what 6.5 was meant to show to you, because maybe it was partially my bad not giving enough details. All For One found out about danmachi. He also found out that danmachi compared to MHA is at a quicker time rate. Now, you might be confused. So basically, 2 weeks have passed in MHA from when Deku originally disappeared. Now, over on Izuku's side, about around a month has passed for him. Now, if we compare these 2 times, obviously there's something in a miss here. Especially because at the end of part 6, Izuku still wants to head home. He doesn't want to stay here. But when we look up at 6.5, Izuku wants to stay there. Now, I figured this would be enough to kind of question it. But I think this detail mainly got overlooked and people just really weren't paying attention to it, which I can understand, you know. That could be my fault once again for not adding enough ample detail to supply this point. But this point it was trying to make is that the time in between MHA and danmachi are totally different. So to give you all an example, basically the timeline is that 1 week in MHA equals a year in danmachi. So it's been 2 years in danmachi for Deku when Uraraka and One For All were looking at him. Now, I didn't really use Uraraka for any more of a reason than just because Uraraka was the easiest one to, well, become corrupt, in my opinion, out of all the hero students. And personally, I don't even like Uraraka that much. Not gonna lie, I don't like her character trait of being a hero to make cash, even though I know it's for her family. Still irks me kind of wrong. But at basis, that's what I was trying to convey. The time period is different. So out of anything, it's not an Uraraka ship. That's not what I was trying to set up. What I was trying to set up was One For All's abilities to now not access it currently because the quirk still teleports people to a random location. Luckily, he was able to combine the quirk's abilities with another quirk of his, which allowed him to peer into the location itself, which did get triggered off some gods in the future. Now, there's also tons of issues with, like, how could All For One peer into the time zone and all of that. When the time's different, everything should be moving very quickly and all of that. And the whole entire BS about Deku needing to want to come back was false. Because All For One can't do anything to Deku currently. He can't pull Izuku out of there. So, that was the main plot point in that area. To get All For One to know about the other area. Now, I'm sorry once again if this confused some people. It could very well have confused people, and I do apologize for that. But that was the main plot point. Now, it might sound like I might be kind of mad. I'm not really mad. It's just like when you read your comment section and everyone's like, hey, yo, what the fluff, dude? And you're sitting over here and you're like, hey, yo, what happened, dude? Then you realize that people for this, that, and a bag of chips didn't understand the reasoning behind your statements and stuff. It just kind of itches you the bad way. I love y'all. Y'all are my fans. You guys are all my supporters. Not gonna lie, you guys did kind of help me get through a tough time that I'm still going through currently. So I do want to say thank you to each and every one of you in the comment section who view the video, who like it, all of that. I do want to say thank you. Now let's jump straight into this what if. Now, where we last left off, Izuku had just started to get his equipment forged by Hephaestus. She decided to forge it for free in trade for Izuku, showing her some gun schematics, which Izuku personally started to realize that showing off gun schematics to a professional forger might not be the smartest idea for his buck, and that he should probably rethink his future interactions with Hephaestus, showing more different weapons. Other than that, Izuku and Aiz ended up eating a pretty peaceful lunch of crepes and everything. The next day happened, and this day Izuku was going to go into the dungeon again. Even though most of the Loki Familia members tend to take a larger break, Izuku decided that he should try to continuously enter the dungeon. Most people kind of figured he was just an battle freak, but Izuku knew very well that training your body daily was a necessity to keep up your strengths. And Izuku knew getting live practice against, live competitors could be a very useful thing to help him, keep fighting. Eventually, Izuku ended up preparing himself to start fighting. He took a deep breath as he entered the dungeon. When he entered there, it was relatively peaceful. He was able to easily clear out the first few floors and eventually made it to the 18th. He decided he would start training on the 20th. This was where Loki and the rest of the Familia recommended a level 2 venture would train on, if they had a party. Izuku, on the other hand, did not have a party. Izuku was training on the 20th floor, when eventually he saw some familiar faces. He didn't see them this morning, so he figured that they were all in here as well. He saw Az, Tion, Tiona, Leafia, and Revelia all down into the dungeon as well. Izuku walked over and greeted all of them. To their surprise, they were surprised to see their new famous recruit training so diligently. Izuku eventually ended up stating that he wanted to train to become stronger, which most of the girls understood. But he then stated that in order to become stronger, he needed to train against harder enemies, which Izuku thought would be very easy to do if he came into 20th floors, which most of the girls also agreed with. Revelia was kind of confused why Izuku really even needed to train against these monsters. He should probably more likely go up to train against higher monsters. And eventually Izuku answered her question without her even asking, stating that the main reason why he chose to train against level 20 monsters was because it was recommended to him by other people. The girls, understanding that the other people, more likely the people that couldn't go on the expedition for this, that, and a bag of chips, knew that the reasoning behind it was probably because he had just stated that he raised to level 2. Izuku being raised to level 2 can now access about around 50% of One For All just fine without any issues or any injuries to his body. And yes, I know the manga has him access 55 with no issues, but I misread the manga and I thought it was 35. So now he'll finally be equivalent to his manga counterpart. Back to us, Stain though. Izuku eventually ended up joining the girls in their practice. They decided to head back down, mainly because Izuku was very active in his training. He said that he wanted to train his magic parameter, which Revelia and Leafia decided to help him. Revelia knew that Izuku was kind of sort of a prodigy with magic, while Leafia mainly wanted to train against this man that had stolen her eyes from her. because she knows that eyes would always stare at Izuku whenever he was present, with a longing gaze. Not too much of a love one, but one that holds a caring gaze. Not much romantic. Eventually, Izuku ended up chilling out on his bench. Well, on a bench. He had created using wood magic, just very simply, which most of the other girls also enjoyed. They were kind of surprised at Izuku's magic storage capabilities. And Izuku, not being able to really give an answer, just kind of shrugged his shoulders at the time being. He couldn't give an answer why he had a high magic parameter, or not a high one. He had about an A rank in magic before his next level up, so he couldn't really explain why he was able just to use magic, and a lot of it pretty commonly, seeing how most mages in the world cost a lot of magic to perform some simple spells. So it kind of shocked them how Izuku was so able to easily create magic, or create physical objects, which was tended to be known as one of the higher degrees of magic, as long as it was something that was not related to physical creation itself, like how ice and just basic other magics work. Eventually, Izuku and the rest of them all got back up after staying down and started to head back down. Izuku, walking downwards, remembered the quirk of one of the teachers. He didn't talk to the teacher much, mainly because the teacher was mainly at the USJ, and he only talked to her once. He knew some of his friends had talked to this teacher more, but he really hadn't talked to her at all. Izuku remembered that 13 had a black hole quirk. He was looking for quirk users that had a spatial quirk, or something to do with space, and 13 was the closest personnel that fit the budget. So Izuku told Revelia, as well as everyone else, that he had a new spell he wanted to try, which all the girls, understanding what this could mean, decided to let Izuku go do it. Eventually, Izuku ended up starting to chant the spell. Endless abyss, an endless gaping hole. Open up and swallow my prey whole. I call upon your name to help use your power to this day. 13. And then eventually, a small black hole appeared in front of Izuku. Most of the girls there didn't know what kind of spell Izuku had used, but they knew that the monster in front of them just suddenly vanished, with Izuku as well suddenly falling to the ground. Izuku found it very hard to stand up, which most of the girls realized was probably because he had a lack of mana. When Revelia asked for what that spell was, Izuku explained that it was a spell based off of one of his friend's powers. She had the power to generate what Izuku called a black hole, which confused Revelia because she didn't know what this object, black hole, was. Izuku ended up explaining that a black hole was a very, very destructive object that could easily destroy personnel, anyone who was in it, with relative ease and without an issue. This kind of shocked Revelia and Eyes, mainly because this kind of magic being used, not Revelia and Eyes, Leafia and Eyes. Revelia and Leafia. God. This kind of shocked them all, mainly because they realized that this kind of magic could very well be used at a more potent degree, allowing almost anyone that could even harness it to be much stronger and more capable than what they were currently. They kind of thank God that Izuku was in their familia, mainly because they could actually lecture Izuku about the magic that he was trying to use and explain that it was a very dangerous thing for him to be practicing, much less be using in actual combat. Izuku understood what they were getting at. He had known that 13 had multiple troubles when she was young, learning how to use her quirk and stuff. And Izuku realized that using magic alone had basic issues. Izuku then ended up relaxing again, needing to conserve and regenerate his mana. Eventually, Revelia and Leafia decided to head up. Leafia a little bit begrudgingly, but after some convincing words of Revelia, she decided to let Izuku and Az have a moment together. Eventually, Az ended up looking towards Izuku and offered her lap to him. This embarrassed Izuku a lot, but decided to take it. For lack of a better word, he didn't even know why he decided to take it itself. It just seemed natural to him. Eventually, Izuku laid down on Az's lap and noticed it was way softer than what he had originally imagined it to be, especially with the armor she tended to, well, have weared. It looked very uncomfortable, so Izuku wasn't the most excited about sleeping on someone else's lap, but found that when he actually decided to do so, it was way more comfortable. Eventually, Izuku passed out afterwards, to Az's delight as she started playing with the tufts of hair on Izuku's forehead. Eventually, Izuku awoke to Az playing with his hair, to his shock as he quickly tried to stand up, hitting Ai's forehead to forehead. Ai's rubbed her forehead a bit as Izuku quickly apologized for moving so abruptly. Ai's really didn't care much, seeing how the injury on her forehead really didn't hurt as much as Izuku was making it out to be. And she kind of laughed almost at how Izuku reacted when he accidentally hit her, especially seeing how he wanted to so quickly get away, but is now quickly trying to help ease any pain. Eventually, Aiz and Izuku started talking. Aiz asked Izuku lots of questions about his past. She was mainly curious because he had mentioned heroes. Even though Aiz knew that heroes were a thing of the past, something about their existence kind of indulged her, to say the least. It caused her to want to get to know Izuku more, know the heroic look on a boy's face, to say with a lack of a better word. Eventually, Izuku started to talk more about his past. He stated where he had come from, that there were multiple, personnel that were heroes. Very much so like how there are multiple people that are adventurers. Heroes had to fight other personnel known as villains. Villains primarily use their powers, for more nefarious deeds, while heroes, as the name implies, tend to use their powers to help protect the weak. Eventually, Izuku went on to explain that originally he had no power, and because of it, he was bullied and outcasted by most of the people around him. Some days, Izuku wondered if he was a burden on his family members too, and contemplated taking his own life, which gave Aiz a very grave look on her face, wanting to comfort the boy in front of her. He then explained that he then met a hero, and this hero was the best hero he ever knew, and the best hero that will ever grace the face of this, planet. Aiz was kind of confused about this, and Izuku said, "That hero gave me hope. He gave me hope to keep living, hope to keep fighting, hope to keep moving on with my life, making everything easier for me. Every step I take, I try to aspire to become like him." Aiz looked at Izuku kind of weird-like as he started to have slight tears in his eyes. And then Aiz said something that caught Izuku off guard. "Well, aren't you a hero already?" Izuku looked at Aiz kind of confusingly, before he kind of almost laughed at Aiz's remark. It was kind of simple to understand what Aiz was getting at. Izuku did have his professional hero's license, but Izuku also remembered that the license wasn't what a hero was meant to be. The license was just a portion of being a hero. A hero is someone to save people, not someone that does work. Deku almost laughed because he felt like he had been foolish this whole time, wondering if he ever could be a true hero. And Deku then looked towards as the girl that was sitting in front of him, who had just saying it so plainly, almost like he was a fool. Izuku realized that Az looked way more beautiful than what he first realized her, almost like she had gone under a metamorphosis while he was reacting his story about how he became strong. Eventually, Izuku almost laughed it off at this point, realizing that he never really did look at the people around him. He mainly focused on getting stronger and progressively trying to help people. So he never really pandered to romantic relationships that much. Izuku smiled, and the smile made Az's heart slightly flutter, which confused her because she had never really felt her heart flutter before. As Izuku then looked towards her with a giant smile on his face, saying, "You're right, Az. I guess I should really be happy for what I have." Az smiled back at Izuku, saying, "Don't worry. Because as long as I'm here, I'll help protect you," she said as she hammered her fist at her chest, which caused Izuku to slightly laugh, and he says, "Or I'll protect you. Either way, we're a family now. We should protect each other." Aiz ended up shaking her head up and down and saying yes. She was kind of confused about the feeling inside her chest, but decided to push it down for the time being, mainly because she wanted to get to know Izuku better. Eventually, Deku and Aiz both left, and ended up walking out of the dungeon pretty peacefully. Some of the citizens gawked at Izuku leaving the dungeon with Aiz, as was known as being one of the, well, more predominantly sought-after adventurers that were female to be courted by men. Aiz really didn't like most of the personnel that tried to court her. Courter's a fancy term for engagement. Figured I would make that clear. So she usually tend to turn down most of them by just giving them a straight look, or telling them that she wasn't interested in dating at the time. But realizing how her walk with Izuku could be taken in a very different limelight, Aiz eventually realized that she really disliked the people looking at her, but she really didn't mind it when people like Izuku looked at her, which caused her to once again question how she had lived up to this point, and questioned her emotions towards Izuku, especially the new one that she hadn't felt for anyone before. Eventually, Aiz ended up deciding that she would discuss this matter with Leafia and Riverdale later on, seeing how they were both very knowledgeable, more knowledgeable than she had been on almost any factor, really. So she figured it would be okay to discuss the matter with them, before eventually turning back to Izuku and saying that she would be off now. Izuku wished Aiz a very well time on her trip, as he ended up heading back to the manor. He didn't know where Aiz went, but he headed back and decided to lay down in his bed. He thought about what if he couldn't leave and live the rest of his life here. And then Deku imagined Aiz being a lot older and holding hands with her and having a fun time. Eventually, Izuku sighed and slowly drifted off to sleep. And that's where I'm going to leave it off, guys. If you liked it, hit the like button. If you enjoyed it, hit the subscribe button. And until next time, goodbye.